Well, good morning, everybody, or good evening, wherever you may be. I'm Mike Useum. I'm on the faculty here at the Wharton School. Welcome to our series on the impact of the epidemic and all that else is going on leadership, especially in the private sector, but not limited to it. We have a special guest today. We're going to be speaking with the Chief Executive of Amway, Milind Pant, and we're going to engage in a dialogue maybe for 15 minutes on my part with him, and then we'll open it up to your questions. The agenda here is to think about leadership when it really matters, and we have a person who has been leading a company when it really does matter. As Chief Executive of Amway, Milind Pant has been responsible for an enterprise that brings in between $8 and $9 billion a year, selling all over the world in more than 100 countries. Some 16,000 employees and about 1 million people who work with the company in selling its many products. So with that, Milind, let me welcome you to the program.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you and having this discussion.
Well, great to have you here. And I'm going to begin a little bit more personally, and then we'll bring it into the current challenges that you have been facing with the shutdown, the events in the wake of several movements, including Black Lives Matter. But let me begin, Milind, with a more personal question just to get us going on your own career. I know you grew up in the foothills of the Himalayas in India. You worked for Unilever, the great consumer products company that sells all over the world. You worked as chief executive president for Pizza Hut at Yum Brands. And just a question to get us going, what brought you in, thinking very personally here, to an interest in managing a private sector company, whether it's Unilever or Amway now?
Well, Mike, thanks for that question. And as I reflect on the journey, frankly, this was not part of any plan. As you said, I grew up in the foothill of the Himalayas, and as we were growing up, on hindsight, we didn't feel it at that time, but on hindsight, we had modest material means. We didn't have air conditioning at home. I remember we got a television when I was in my early teens, but our parents, they had all the love for us. They encouraged us to do the right thing, study hard, work hard, and life will kind of figure itself out. And that was the approach. And I went through my schooling and my education in India, and I was quite fortunate to be able to join Unilever in India, which was almost like my second MBA. But when I joined Unilever, I went through its training program, Mike, which you are well familiar with, across functions and categories, including spending 8 weeks living in a village in India as a part of the training program without water, running water or electricity, just trying to understand the heart and soul of India. After doing all that, I thought I'll get a role in perhaps strategy or marketing of one of the brands like, Dove or Sunsilk or Axe or one of the consumer brands. But, I moved to a business unit that made leather shoes for exports. Now, don't ask me why Unilever India, Anglo-Dutch multinational, did shoes for exports, but I went to that business unit. I said, okay, no problem. I've never been outside of India. Perhaps I'll get a chance to go and meet customers in London or New York City. And I still remember my general manager said, no, young man, you got to start with the coal phase, which is processing and buying of leather. So I spent the first 2 years of my career after my management graduate studies in tanneries. And this is tanneries in India 30 years back. That foul smell is still in my nostrils. But, it was a great career in Unilever. And then I was fortunate to have a chance to join Yum. The last 10, 12 years, my family and I, we've lived in over 3 continents and 5 countries. We were living in Durban, South Africa in 2007, 2008. We moved to Delhi From Delhi, we moved to Bangkok, from Bangkok to Shanghai, from Shanghai to Dallas, and now we live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So it's been quite a journey and not something that I would have imagined that I would have a chance to live through.
Milind, a question about that journey. You began, as you said, living in a village. It's a very famous feature of being part of Unilever, where you spend time with your ultimate customers, Village India, in the case of what was then called Hindustan Lever in India. As you went from that person, young at the time, as you began, to the responsibilities you now bear for everything from finance and accounting and operations and human resources and working with your owners, what was, I'll make it singular, the most formative experience along the way that gave you the capacity to serve as what we sometimes, in a kind of boring phrase, refer to as a general manager, where you really have to think about everything? So was there a moment?
Well, I don't think there was one particular moment. I think I would point out to a couple of learnings, Mike, if that's okay. One, I think just the training in Unilever India and the way the career was kind of planned and the opportunities opened up was by its nature very broad. It was across functions, and then of course there were opportunities to work both in customer management and general management, sales general management on one side and brand marketing on the other. So that, I think, took me in good stead in my initial foundational years. But there were then other instances where one learned it, I guess, on the job. My first role as managing director of a country was with Yum in Thailand. And I moved there. It was a reasonable sized business. We had 10,000 employees in Thailand, and the business had been struggling. And I went there, of course, with this determination to turn around the business and to put all the strategies in place and to build something that would last beyond me. But my biggest learning from my time in Thailand and my time as the managing director, my first role, was not so much on strategy, on an intellect, was actually on leading with heart. And that's one stint, especially working in Thailand. Everything is about the heart. The Thais have a word for it called jai. And it's all jai. And my Unilever training, though it was fantastic, hadn't fully prepared me for this aspect of leading a large business with a large set of employees. And since then, I've personally been on a journey to lead with love and humility instead of pride and fear, which is so human to do, especially when times are tough.
Well, Linda, a famous book in my field is Leading from the Heart. Same point, we got to lead with the head, of course, but we don't forget the heart. I've got a question then about your transition from serving as president of Pizza Hut over to Amway. And again, a private enterprise, a private company, a business enterprise, but in some respects, the two could not be more different in how they operated. What was your biggest learning terrain as you came into Amway, something you didn't know about that you really had to master as you became chief executive of Amway, which is not so long ago at this point?
Mike, quite frankly, till 2 years back or so, I didn't even know, I couldn't even point out to Grand Rapids on the map where we now live with our family. So yes, this was a very this was all very new for us. As I came into Amway, I was very, very clear that my first 100 days were all about listen and learn. 90% of our revenues are outside of United States, in Japan, Korea, China, which is our largest market, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, India, Europe, Russia, Latin America, and of course, here in the US. I spent an immense amount of time being out on the road, and meeting our entrepreneurs who are really the soul and the heart of a business. And my main learning, while I learned from everyone, I even came to a program that you and Peter had organized just before I formally took over as the CEO, again, as a part of my listen and learn. But my biggest learnings and the most valuable learnings were from the entrepreneurs and Amway business owners. And I still remember this was within my first 100 days in March last year, and I was in Tokyo. And one of our entrepreneurs, Makiko-san, he insisted she wanted to meet me, and the kind of the carrot she gave me is she said we'll all cook together and we'll cook and Indian meal with basmati rice and tandoori chicken in Tokyo. I said, all right, let's do it. And she then shared with me how she is building a business going forward around a healthy cooking community on Instagram. And she had hit 20,000 followers on Instagram. And I looked at her and I said, oh my God, this is the future. The entrepreneurial spirit, which is the core of Amway, along with us being a social idea around relationships, now put together in the online world, this is the future and this is social commerce. And that's where we put together what is now our 10-year plan, which we can do in a privately held family-owned company, which is our journey to unleash entrepreneurship with social commerce. But that idea came in listening to an entrepreneur in Tokyo.
That's great. Milind, in about 2 minutes, we're going to open it up. I'd like people viewing this to send their questions in now. We'll go through a few of those as they come in. Here's my final question to you. The last now almost 3 months have been quite extraordinary in everybody's lives, whether it's Thailand or China or the US of A. With the coronavirus, the Black Lives Matter movement, Me Too, was in the background as well. And just a final question to you, as you have managed through the last couple of months, what has been different from the way you would have led the company prior to about March 15th?
Well, I guess in some ways, everything has been different. But here's what we realized early on, January 23rd to be exact, because that's when, from a China team, we knew, there was a pandemic and the lockdowns were coming. We prioritized the safety of our colleagues over anything else. We've got 16,000 colleagues across the world. We've got organic farms, thousands of acres, 6,000 acres of organic farms in 3 countries. We've got manufacturing locations in Guangzhou, Madurai, Buenapark near LA, and here in Ada, Michigan. And we said the most important thing is we're going to do everything to keep each other safe. Once we had that in place, every other challenge that came our way, be it supply chain or figuring out how to work from home and all the other stuff, it kind of sorted itself out. My biggest learning through these last now almost 5 months and now 3 months working from home has been that during this pandemic, the best of Amway has been unleashed. Mike, this may surprise you. It surely surprised me. We did an employee engagement survey bang in the middle of the pandemic. Almost 10,000 of our employees responded. We usually never get a response that high from an employee engagement survey. And 91% of our colleagues across the world said they were highly engaged with Amway. And 94% said they were proud of working in Amway, numbers that we've never had in the past. So this pandemic has been an opportunity to go through the decades of culture that's been built in Amway, decades of nurturing of our purpose, helping people live better, healthier life. All that has come to the fore during these times. And that's been my most fascinating learning. And, our challenge and my personal challenge is how does one now kind of sustain this as we move to beyond pandemic, which we will do across the world, and a number of our markets have already moved on to the new normal.
Yep. Well, then this has been great. I'm going to bring in now Steve Guglielmi, who is the editor for Knowledge at Wharton, the platform we are on here. And Steve Milind is going to offer a couple of questions from those who are live with us right now. So, Steve, get us going.
Hi, Milind. Okay, yeah, we have a number of good questions from our audience, so we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Well, the first one is a follow-up from what you were just talking about. You talked about the tremendous opportunity that the crisis has given you and the company. What would you say is the biggest challenge you've faced during this crisis, and sort of how have you worked to overcome that?
The biggest challenge we face, in addition to keeping all our colleagues safe, was essentially a supply chain challenge of making sure that our core portfolio, Steve, is to do with nutrition and health and hygiene, long-term immunity, long-term health products, and the demand for some of these products has spiked. And to ensure that, across the world, managing supply disruptions, city lockdowns, changing regulations, obviously keeping our manufacturing locations open, that was the other big challenge. And I think the third challenge for all of us was just a personal challenge. How do we sustain our mental stamina through weeks of uncertainty around friends and families and communities? What personal habits do each of us inculcate so that we can get through this in a way in which it gives us an opportunity to be better and is able to support our own families and our own friends and our own communities. And one of the things we realized very early in the pandemic here in West Michigan is I got a call from the CEO of one of the largest hospital networks here saying, Milind, do you all make hand sanitizers? This was middle of March. I said, no, we don't. And then I checked with my team and they said, yeah, we don't, but you know what? Maybe we can figure it out. And in 5 days from that call, we had made hand sanitizers, got all the approvals, and then shipped it to hospital networks across the West Michigan. And it's not something that we may or may not do it for commercial, but it's instances like that of our teams coming together to solve problems during this crisis, which has been a true blessing.
Okay, what changes, this is a little more nuts and bolts, what changes in business approach are your reps in the field asking for from Amway as a result of the pandemic? Are they asking for different ways to engage with customers, for example?
That's correct. Our 1 million entrepreneurs across the world, they've pivoted to new ways of doing business. Essentially, their mantra is that online is the new offline. So they're building their business on social. We have partnerships with social networks. We have a partnership with Tencent on the WeChat platform in China. So we've activated that for our Amway business owners, entrepreneurs to reach customers and do social selling to customers. We've just done a similar partnership with Kakao Talk in Korea. So we are partnering with social platforms to offer our entrepreneurs the ability to connect with customers. And of course, we are investing in our own abilities to have a easy, frictionless shopping for ABOs and their customers.
Right. And speaking, you do have a very distributed workforce. How do you talk about leading from the heart? How does a company with such a distributed workforce sort of reinforce corporate values all the way down the chain? What are the challenges there, and how do you go about doing that?
I think that still remains a challenge, Steve. I think what we've dipped into is the reservoir of our culture and goodwill that has been built over the years. We are a family company, and our values and in some sense our purpose is not something that's been written by executives or consultants and put on a piece of paper. It's something that's been a part of the business for 60 years. So I think that's come in good stead for us, and we've kind of harnessed that and empowered people. The other thing that's happened is management has got democratized through this process. Every person on a Microsoft Teams or a Zoom call has an equal voice. And in some sense, because control and compliance is more difficult to do, that has led to empowering those, especially who are in the markets and those who are closest to our Amway business owners, and to do the right thing. We have 3 culture principles, Steve: live to serve, love to learn, and lead from the heart. And while these culture principles were always good on a piece of paper, in some sense during this pandemic, they've shown, and people have got an opportunity to walk the talk on it.
Right. Just to wrap things up, because you have time for one more question, what is the single most important leadership quality that you think is needed in this time and maybe in the near future?
Well, I'm not sure if there is one single quality, but something that I've always stayed close to is I'm very fond of reading Bill Gates twice a year kind of recommendation on books, and this was maybe 6 or 7 years back. He had a recommendation on Carol Dweck's mindset, a growth mindset, and it's something that I personally believe. For me, I'm work in progress, and I continue to learn every day. And I've got to remind myself to be in a growth mindset and not to be in a fixed mindset. And that's something which, our founders in Amway, Rich and Jay, were pioneers. And in Amway itself, we encourage everyone to have a founder's growth mindset. I'd say that perhaps is the most important quality that I personally value. And the other one is lead from the heart. For all of us, at times, and especially during times of stress and kind of conflict that are taking place now, we can't go into pride or fear. And I think we've got to remind ourselves and take help from each other to continue to be on a journey to lead with love and humility.
Oh, thank you so much, Milind.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. Milind, thank you. I'm going to remind our viewers and listeners to tune in a week from now. We're going to have Sidney Finkelstein, who's on the faculty of the Tuck School, the business school at Dartmouth. He's the author, listen to this title, everybody, of Why Smart Executives Fail. I think we all want to learn something about that. He's obviously thought a lot about the current circumstance as well. And Milind, I gave you the heads up before we got going here that we practice a after-action review here at the end. I'm going to offer a couple points. I've been taking notes that came from our discussion that I think, well, without question, transcend the discussion, and I hope will prove useful for people who've been viewing and listening to this particular cast here. And then, if you wouldn't mind, we'll close with a couple of your own final takeaway points, if I can put it that way. So here are my 3. Then we'll turn to you, and then we'll hear from you, and then thank you for being with us. Number 1, you just said it a few minutes ago, but don't forget to lead with the heart along with the head. So we're dealing with people, not automatons or robots. They have a heart, and it's vital for leading at any level, maybe especially from the very top. Number 2, I like the phrase, listen and learn. We learn so much if we're in touch with the entrepreneurs who work with us, from the customers who buy from us. And it's amazing if you've got a good ear, what you can acquire and bring in. Number 3, relevant to especially the last several months, employee safety is everything. And if we do that well, they will never forget. Their loyalty will be there for years to come. Len, what would you add? A couple final points, and then we're going to close.
Mike, you summarized it so well. I would just add a couple of ones. I'm reminded of one of your books that I read before I took on this role, which is why long-term strategy is the best short-term strategy. And I think during times like this, we just got to remind ourselves of that mantra, Mike, which you had very well captured in a book that you wrote. I think the other thing which I'll just mention is that I personally consider myself to continue to be work in progress. And as I was growing up in India during my teenage years, my father used to encourage me to listen to BBC radio to learn English, which is not my first language, or to read the morning newspaper, which used to be the Times of India. And I frankly didn't do either of them well. But that stayed with me in my back of my head. And today, I read 5 to 7 newspapers online, every day. I can't get through to my weekend without reading the Friday's issue of The Economist, actually Thursday evening in the US. And I read as many books as I can. And Amrita, my wife, believes that makes me a very boring person, but I just love to learn. And this conversation today has been another opportunity for me to do that. So thank you, Mike, and thank you, Steve.
All right, Milind, thank you very much. Really appreciate your taking the time to join us today. As is an increasingly widespread custom, even though we're not in the same room together, I'm going to ask everybody. We've got a lot of people live with this, and then others will look back at this once we put it out there in an asynchronous way. I'd like everybody to join me. You're going to see me and not everybody else, but I can hear the applause. So, Milind, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Goodbye,
so much.
everybody. Join us in 1 week. We'll be back. Thank you very much.